Hey, what's up, Gearland? We got Matt Laurence here today for our teacher profile series. How you doing today, Matt?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Doing all right. Just moving forward. Glad to have you for our first interview.
Likewise, glad to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, so Matt's a session musician in Nashville. He does hired gun work for R&B and soul groups. He can switch genres from country to rock. Do you do any jazz? I forget.
Not really like jazz gigs, but there's not really a whole lot. So in Nashville, there's not really a whole lot of like jazz gigs themselves. It's a lot of pop gigs. Obviously a bunch of country gigs, and some R&B and soul gigs also.
Okay, so when you were in your beginning stages of guitar, was it what was your bass genre that was your foundation for learning?
I'd say the foundation for learning for me was mostly blues, for sure. Listening to guys like BB King, um, learning all the little Hendrix moves and stuff like that too. Hendrix was a big one. Not that I ever like sounded like Hendrix or anything like that. That's pretty hard
Sure.
to do, but yeah. Um, I went through like when I very first started. I was playing just acoustic, and so I was listening to like a lot of folk music, just getting those beginning chords down. So I'd say that it pretty much went from like acoustic to electric blues and pop stuff, and then I started to get really interested in soul music. Like what I guess nowadays what we would call like the classic soul stuff, like Stevie Wonder and Wilson Pickett and stuff like that. Um, all those session guys like Reggie Young and David T. Walker playing on all the Jackson 5 stuff. And then that kind of led me into the R&B world a little bit. And then some gospel stuff too. Um,
That's a tough genre. Gospel is
a
really
lot.
tough rhythmically.
Yeah, because it really just pulls from every single genre basically. It pulls from rock stuff. Although there's some, I grew up with a fair amount of rock stuff too. I would When I was coming up with blues, I also was coming up with bands like Free, playing those lead lines, and Clapton, which are is blues but is rock as well. You know.
Yeah, it's just if you want to attract people to your ministry or your sermon as a church musician, you want to mix in all those exciting genres, and it's just sort of like a gumbo of styles. That's really dope. So yeah, I just wanted everyone out there to know that Matt is Regi Wooten's protege. Like you take lessons with Reggie in Nashville.
Yeah, every once in a while. I probably take a few lessons. I was taking So this is kind of a long story, but I started taking lessons with him, and I probably studied for him for like 4 months, really heavily, like every week or so. And then now I kind of pop in every couple, I'd say like every year or so. Maybe not as much this year, but I'd say I pop in for a few lessons a couple times a year um, from him. But getting the opportunity to spend time with guys like him, and his brothers, Joseph, who plays keys for Steve Miller Band, and obviously Victor too, and Roy. All those guys are just super generous and just really just like the nicest guys ever. I've spent a lot of time at Victor's camp. When I first got here, I went as a camper. So it's called I believe it's Victor Wooten Center for Music and Nature. And basically, you just go out into the woods and go learn from these guys, and then you also get to be in nature and go for hikes and learn about stuff like that. So it's really, really awesome opportunity. I think they just passed their like 20 year. So I did that, and then I just kind of I was just new to town. I did that. I ran into that scenario pretty much right as soon as I got here, and then I kind of just started going to their shows around town. And I kind of just started to get to know them a little bit. And then I started volunteering for the camp, and
Nice.
and so that's really where I started spending a lot of my time. Was I would just go for a few weeks at a time. So I'd say I've probably spent like a couple months out there, just in general. And basically, it's a really awesome opportunity to have like a mutual benefit type thing. I can help them, and I get to learn at the same time.
It's a
You know,
campground over in the outskirts of Nashville. It's like,
yeah, it's like an hour west of Nashville. And and yeah, so it's not a campground. It's like I think Victor and his wife, they own the land, and then they have a camp there. So they have like cabins and everything, and you just go out there for a week and go learn and stuff like that. So I've spent a lot of time there. Um, and people always ask like, "Hey, Victor, do you do like private lessons and yada yada?" And for the most part, his answer is usually, he doesn't have the time to do private lessons, so he sends everybody to Regi, and
okay.
or anybody that is in Nashville that can go take lessons. They send him to Regi, so that's how I ended up taking lessons with him. You know.
Did those lessons lead you to like some pretty nice connections? Being as though you were, actively involved with their camp, volunteering, just being a face and person that showed up all the time, and they kind of gained some rapport with you. Did they help you out with any like career stuff?
Um, I'd say I wouldn't say nothing like directly. Like Victor hasn't called me for a gig per se, but I've definitely learned a lot. Like when I came to town, I came from a small town and just like a small area in general, like right outside of New York City, and there really wasn't that crazy of a music scene there. Because it was like an hour north of the city, so we had to, at least for me to find any, really skilled musicians, I would have to go drive all the way into the city. So the area that I
Mhm.
was from, it was like kind of the big fish in a small town sort of thing. And I had a lot of growing to do when I got here. I really did. Of just like what it meant to be a professional, and what it, just do your job.
Well,
Learning
well,
things like learning the songs. So I learned a lot from them, and that has helped me build, you know, what I've done, and the great opportunities that I've been like fortunate enough to do. You know.
yeah, and you're honestly you're one of the only people I know, kind of like my generation or age range, like mid 20s to early 30s. You're one of the only people I know that has a kind of like a success story with a place like Nashville. People go to these hubs like Austin, Nashville, wherever, New Orleans, LA, but not a lot of people like put all the pieces together. And it seems like you've been able to do that. I mean, I saw your Austin City Limits performance, and that's pretty awesome. Just to be able to do that as someone from our generation. You mind if we share that with the audience here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. It's a long road coming, and there's a lot more ahead too here. You see it?
Yep.
Yeah. Let's see.
I never seen
Just
such
a
a
short
pretty
clip.
thing. You're so beautiful to me. Yeah. I never seen such a pretty thing. Oh, you are so beautiful. So beautiful.
But yeah, man.
The War and Treaty, huh? What I
Yep.
that's really the
So,
first time I've heard of the War and Treaty. What's the story behind them?
they are so the two front people, Tanya and um, Tanya and Michael. They've been married for a while, and they both had a lot of experience in the music industry, and they just decided to make a project together. And their music director, who was playing bass in that clip, his name is Max, and he called me for that gig, and I work with them every once in a while. Kind of just, I'm sort of like, if somebody can't make it, I'm kind of the guy that fills in. And so it's been great working with them. And they have songs. I believe they're signed to Rounder Records, I think.
Okay.
I know they have a couple albums off of that, which so that is kind of like a rock clip, but they have a lot of stuff that's down tempo. They have a lot of you talk about a gumbo. They are a real gumbo. They have some bluegrass stuff. They have some pop stuff and some but a lot of it definitely is definitely influenced by older music, old school
Sure.
vibes for sure.
That's what Austin City Limits is all about, really. It's where'd you get that Les Paul, man? Whose Les Paul is that?
So yeah, I was thinking about that too. So that's a funny story. So this I believe I don't I need to take it into one of the stores here. There's Everybody tells me to take it to this place, Gruen Guitars in Nashville, and this guy, he's got a really well-known shop, and he basically can look at any guitar and tell you exactly what it is. But this, my best guess is a 71 Les Paul Deluxe.
Can
Um,
we see the headstock a little closer?
yeah.
Pull it,
So,
pull it a little bit closer.
yeah.
Uh,
So it should say Deluxe.
there you
Um,
go. Yeah.
so the and then just got a lot of checking and tiger stripes on it, which is awesome. Um, so yeah, man. The reason I say best guess is because the serial number actually points to a 68, and all the electronics point to, you open it up and then you look inside of it and it says 68.
Okay.
Um, but for whatever reason, in the early 70s, the serial numbers weren't correct.
Oh.
I don't know why. But it has a mini volute, which I think they came out in 1970. So we know that even though the stuff says 68, it can't be, because they didn't come out with this little bump. I don't know if you could see it right here.
Maybe get it a little bit closer to the camera.
This
Oh,
this piece. Whereas before that, it was just straight.
okay.
This little bump here. Um, so yeah. So I've been meaning to bring it in, but I don't remember why, because I haven't thought about this in a while. But um, I, for some reason, determined that it wasn't a 72 and that it was a 71. It has, so these are mini humbuckers,
Okay.
and these were called goof rings, the little rings around it. That's what some people refer to them as. And basically, I think they routed this out. I think the story was it was supposed to be P90s, and people didn't like the P90s for whatever reason. So
Okay.
they ended up coming with the mini humbuckers and putting these little rings on the outside of it. Um,
Kind of as like a filler to compensate for the smaller pickups.
I think so. I don't remember exactly, but it's something along those lines. I was really, really, when I first got the guitar, I've probably had it for like 2 years now. And yeah, I don't remember. I was really heavy into like what exactly everything was, and I kind of don't remember now. But yeah,
Where'd you get it?
so I got it, and I might have shared this story with you on one of our Zoom calls before. But so I had gone to a 4th of July party. It was a friend of my dad's. This is where we got this guitar from,
Okay.
and he he's a keyboard player, and he has so much gear, like it's crazy. And so we my dad hit him up and said, hey, like, Matt's, at the time I was looking for an SG, And I remember that at that one of those parties that we went to, he showed us an SG. And obviously this is not an SG.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he didn't really know guitars. So he just said, well, this is the guitar that he got in the trade. And the trade was he knew somebody, um, we called him Homeless Bob. Uh, but we found out that he basically did a trade for $1,100 back in the 90s. And it was supposed to be a loan. And he just said, I'm going to give him, you know, I'll give him the guitar as collateral. And then like a couple years had gone by and we kind of had realized maybe he didn't have any intention of paying it back.
Okay.
So, um, so then he just had that guitar sitting for a while. So, you know, we paid for it. My dad came and looked at it and this was only a few years ago. So that's basically how I ended up with the guitar, more or less. You know, I was looking for an SG and he pulled this out and I was like, well, I guess it'll do.
And you wanted $1,100 for it? That's it?
No, we gave him more than that. We definitely did. But that's how much he paid for it. We definitely didn't pay full price for it, but we did get a family discount for sure.
What would full price be for something like that?
It really depends, but if I brought it to Carter Vintage Guitars, which is usually where I bring most of if I'm selling any guitar, I usually bring it there. They probably would put it on the shelf for like 32,
Oh, okay.
like 3,200 ish, somewhere around there. Being that it's a Goldtop, I'm not exactly. I don't know. I haven't looked in a little while. Maybe it's gone up. Maybe it's gone down. But they can range. Sometimes you'll see them pop up for 2,000. Sometimes you'll see them pop up for 3,000.
Mm-hmm.
But I say probably in the 3 range, at a place like Carter Vintage Guitars where they know that they probably would be able to sell it pretty quick. So yeah, man, this is my baby though. Yeah. Most of the time during gig season, it's kind of, weird times right now with the virus, but
Yeah.
but hopefully we're turning the corner a little bit. But most of the time when I'm gigging with it all the time, it just stays in the case, and then I just take it out because, I just leave it because I'll be taking it out in a couple of days, if not, the next day, or a few hours sometimes, depending on what's going on. So
Sure.
yeah, but yeah, so it's pretty cool. This was the first Les Paul that I ever had. And these mini humbuckers are a little bit brighter than your average like humbucker in general, which I like. I actually have never had a full humbucker guitar. I've always been either P90s or something like this. But this was my first venture into that world a little bit, and it's really cool for sure.
Maybe
I think these deluxes are so underrated. Like, you could buy a new Les Paul. I don't even know what they are now, but for what, $4,000? You might as well get an old one with some vibe for the same price, and not even that much for less.
Well, I've also heard that, there's a whole school of thought out there that, um, the guitars sound best and play best when they've been played, but also when there's been frequency, uh, bouncing off the body and into the wood. I mean, it's like Yamaha just released a guitar that's like treated in an acoustic environment where they're hitting it with frequency for like a straight month. And I forget what series it is, but there's a whole school of thought out there that treating guitars with vibration and frequency is like a way to get the best out of your instrument. So totally, I mean, if that's true, it would take a while to break in a new Les Paul. And what is it? Everyone usually goes for like the Les Paul Classic, right, rather than the Deluxe. Is that the way it usually
Yeah.
goes?
Yeah, the Deluxe definitely isn't like the most popular one, but guys like Blue Oyster Cult use these guys.
Oh, cool.
who else was it? I think Free. Well, this was the thing was this was in the 70s, the early 70s. This was the main line Paul. This was the main line Les Paul. So Bad Company used them on their early 70s stuff. This was just what they were selling. And you have to figure that like back in the 70s, now it's 2021, which is now these guitars have been around for a while, but
Mhm.
back in the day, like, you know, electric guitars have only been a thing for like 15 years. Like solid body electric guitars. So like the case that came with this, it sat, you sit it straight and then you could see the headstock is kind of leaning back. It basically sat like this. It was sitting on the headstock. Um,
Damn.
so they didn't really make these things. They didn't really have the foresight to think that everybody was going to be using these cases. Um, I guess, but so anyway,
Yeah.
I sold the case alone because it was broken, and yeah, I know some people would be like, yeah, you really should hang on to those. I don't. I'm trying to play this guitar. I don't really care.
Sure. Sure.
I don't want to keep 150, especially if I needed the money, right? I
Totally.
don't keep $150 sitting in the closet for some giant case with a broken buckle that I'm not even going to ever use.
Yeah.
And maybe if I had more room at the time, if I was like 45 and I had a house and you know I had all this room, I probably would have kept it. But I sold the case and then I went on Reverb and I bought a Les Paul case. They're one of the Reunion Blues ones. I'm like, cool. It was pretty much an even trade. I came out like $50, and now I actually have a case that I can use with it. So yeah,
Keep it safe.
yeah. I mean, and because that's the last thing you want. I mean, that's because if you have a case that doesn't protect your Les Paul and the headstocks breaks, you're done. You know, and then some people, I don't know, I haven't had one break, knock on wood, but some people say that it doesn't sound the same, even if they do a really good job, because now you have a joint in the neck. So, and I've literally seen them snap in front of me. Like I was playing. There's an event called Loud Jams here, and I was playing for that, and they had a guitar boat. Something similar to this, but not
Mhm.
not as secure. This is sort of like a home version of it. But
Yeah.
the ones where it's just they don't like these have the little pockets that hold the neck, but and you've seen the ones that are just kind of open and it's just like a slot sort of, and you just kind of fit it somewhere in there. And
Sure.
these Les Pauls are so heavy that if somebody hit it, all the weight sits down here, so it can very easily just slide out of the slot and just go straight down. And if it falls, it's
Uh,
probably a broken headstock most cases. And I saw one literally like right in front of my eyes. It was a dude that just moved to town. I felt so bad for him, and I was like, never again, never again. Anything that's not secure, I'd rather put this in the case. I don't care if it doesn't look as good. Um,
totally.
Inside of the case on stage while we're on a break or something, like I don't care at all. If I'm not breaking my headstock no matter what, you know.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you've already got like some history behind it. You got that Austin City Limits memory.
Mm,
There's probably gonna be more memories in the future. I mean, yeah, yeah, you gotta take care of your baby, right?
yeah, and just the story of just the story of it too. Of just getting it from a family friend, and it had been in the case for almost 20 years. It was over almost 25 years.
So if
Because
if
I
if
think it
the
was like 91 or 92.
if it had that like weird like prop on the headstock, wasn't that bad for the guitar if it was just sitting on the prop for in the case?
Probably. I don't know. It probably was. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it was. If it was laying flat and it had stuff on top of it, it could have been.
Yeah,
But knowing him, he probably put it straight up. In which case, it really wouldn't be that big of a deal.
sure.
Um, but yeah, and we know. Me and my dad both know when he showed us that one time, whatever it was, 15 years ago. Um, where he still has a Les Paul, or sorry, still has an SG somewhere in his house, and he doesn't know it. And
It could be like a Tony Iommi era SG.
I don't know. It could be great. It probably is. If he hasn't even known that it's in his house somewhere, it's I don't know. It's probably really old if he doesn't even know it's there. So,
All
but yeah,
right.
even just to get something like this that had only been played for probably about 20 years, which for a guitar at this age is pretty lucky.
Totally.
The frets were really shot, um, but and actually the bridge collapsed a little bit too. A lot of the times on these old ones the bridge starts to kind of sink in a little bit, so I had to get that replaced. But I did a fret dress that was like $100. I got that. I got that work done for actually by Carter Vintage Guitars. But I did that just to kind of prolong me having to do a refret, and
Okay.
because it was nothing left on it. But I did a refret, so now it's good. And generally like on old Les Pauls or old instruments in general, you can't play something with no frets anyway. So it actually usually just adds to the value if you've done a refret or anything like that. I don't know by how much, but usually that's generally a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, hey man, this is all about your teacher profile. So you mind if we show these guys some good licks for maybe beginner, intermediate, and advanced? You wanna do
Yeah,
that?
yeah, we could do that, man. Let's see, grab. Well, I guess since we've been talking about the Paul, I don't know if it's in tune or not.
Let's plug it in.
but but yeah, this has been my baby for all the gigs and everything like that. So let's see. Can you hear that?
Yeah, maybe just turn your camera down towards the guitar a little bit.
Here, I'll kind of slide up a little bit. That's close enough for Jess. Get a little more volume. But yeah, man. So we had talked about maybe putting some techniques together. I'd say the best beginner technique would probably be slides in general.
Okay.
And you use that as a way to get from one position to the next position. So if I and it just sounds good. I mean, if you just take a regular any regular shape that you already know, you just slide up to it, you really sound like you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Can
we
yeah.
maybe show them like a slow demonstration where if it's someone brand new to guitar, maybe just taking it baby steps for them.
Yeah, so if you start, let's say you start in just your A minor, right? I think most people are probably pretty familiar with that.
Pentatonic.
Yep, your A minor pentatonic. And let's say you go here on the G string. You could slide up from the 7th fret up to the 9th fret. And then slide up to the 9, and then slide back down. And then you could go slide 5 to 7. And really, you could slide any of them. You can go. And if you did that really fast, that would sound good too. I never do that much.
Sure.
I think that's the quickest way if you're a beginner, to elevate, the playing a little bit. And then you could do
Sure.
more than one note. You go, you know, you have stuff like that. Here, I'm gonna actually, it's a little bright.
Keeping it simple, basically, and simple but efficient use of movements.
Yeah. And I mean, that's how I get around, for the most part, get around different positions all the time, you know. And if I wanted to keep going, you know, because then you could start low and yeah. And Hendrix did that all the time too. He'd go,
Yeah.
what do we say, A. You know, so he definitely had a good amount of those in there too.
Well, cool. So work on those slides, all you beginners out there.
But yeah, I'd say, you know, for intermediates, I would say the big thing really. So once you know what the scales are and you can kind of get around them a little bit, the biggest thing would be to get them faster. And that's going to be, well, it's a lot to do with your left hand too, because your fingers got to move there. But the right hand is really important too. So I would say as like an intermediate technique, I would say like alternate picking,
Okay.
which is basically when, instead of just picking one way. So here, these are all downstrokes on the right hand. You know, alternate picking is down up.
Let's get it closer to the camera so we can see what you're doing.
So down, up, down, up, down, up. You know, and that
For sure.
that would be, just to not to go off on too much of a tangent there, but I would say the other intermediate technique would be bending. You know, and being really intentional about, and being really clear about where you're bending to, because when you bend, you increase the pitch of the string. So you're gonna go, if we went here, we're bending up to this note, which is 2 notes higher. You know, rather than, and that's cool sometimes, but you hear a lot of like intermediate players or beginner players. It's just kind of, that actually sounded kind of good, but I don't know, but it's just, you just there's like no, you know, there's no destination, and that's really important with bends. You got to know exactly where. You know,
Yeah. Being like deliberate and in control of like the note that you're bending to, and just having an awareness of it will bring you, you know, that much further ahead. So once you incorporate that, when that becomes second nature, all of a sudden you've got all this other harmony and usage out of the guitar, rather than just doing it because you're told, oh yeah, Stevie Ray Vaughan bent his strings, you know. Like when you're aware of what's happening when the strings are bent, then you're literate, as opposed to being able to do it but not being literate or aware that you know you're essentially going up a third without, you know, just by bending it from your root. Not in all cases, but in that example, that would be the case. It's like bending up from a major third.
You know,
And well, hey man, like what about for the dudes that have been playing for a while? What's your secret sauce for that?
I'd say for that, man, I'd say for the intermediate guys, I would have to say economy picking.
For the advanced players?
Yeah, for the advanced.
Okay.
Because then it's sort of, you know, people would say, talk about sweeps, you know, which would be, you know, it's all one, it's basically a slow strum, right, is what sweep picking is. this sort of deal. Whereas a strum is like this, you know, just do it slowly and controlled. That's, you know, so that's like sweep picking. But if you were going to do economy picking, it's kind of a hybrid between alternate picking. It's basically the hybrid between between sweeping and alternate picking. So alternate picking might be here. And economy picking would be up, down, down, up. So I would say that's the advanced version of picking. And I don't know if I'd say of picking in general, but that's a pretty advanced thing
Sure.
that I know I use all the time. It works great for like 3-note per string. Yeah. You know, that's something I use all the time with my own stuff is economy.
Yeah, and you know what I gather from that is like, you know, you might be a beginner, intermediate, whatever level, and you might do that naturally when you're playing a solo when you're jamming. You might do that, but being aware and doing it deliberately on command, or at least having like the muscle memory to do that, that's something that is absolutely more advanced because you're intentionally doing it rather than doing it by chance or happenstance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and if you listen to those old blues guys, you know, they some every once in a while you'd hear them do it. It would just be a small little thing. It would be, you know, it would go down, down, up. You know, that's economy right there. It's just a little bit of it, and it's not. It's just like a little short phrase, but that's for sure economy picking. Or even they would go, you know, down, down. That counts, man. That's economy for sure.
all those little nuances are literally what creates an individual voice for the guitarist. It they pave way for like advancements within the genre, and I obviously all this territory has already been covered by, you know, the countless uh, amazing musicians, but we want to bring that forward into, you know, current times. And if you don't if you're not aware of stuff like that, you might never learn it, and you might have a bunch of players that are doing like some really baseline picking techniques. So man, I definitely dig that exercise. I didn't actually know that some of those more simple lines were economy of picking. Or and
They can be. They can be. I mean, you can really go either way, you know.
so like Stevie Ray Vaughan did that jam with, was it Albert Lee? Was that who it was?
I probably Albert King. I think it was you talking about the album that they did together.
Yeah, they did like a Canadian like TV show, and they were together. That Albert King guy, like that's almost like what his thing was, like what you just showed with the
Mhm.
economy of picking.
Yeah, yeah,
Pretty
and
sick.
it's kind of just a good way just to sort of get to one note, you know, like, and they might take something really simple, like if it's, you know, it's A, right? They might just go. You hear that all the time, or maybe not the whole, maybe not quite the whole thing. That's just the A major, and you're just going. That's how I do it, but there are a lot of guys that that would just do alternate picking there, and that's totally viable too. But it has a different sound. The economy slash sweeping thing definitely has a rolling effect to it. Like if you listen to guys like Eric Gales, he's crazy at that stuff. Um, and really that goes back to Eric Johnson.
Oh,
I think he's kind of the one that gets the credit for economy picking. Um,
well, I mean, when I think of Johnson, when I think of Robert Johnson, I think of a guy that is
well,
almost playing like,
Johnson,
what was that?
Eric Johnson, not Rob.
Sorry
Yeah,
about that.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, but he wasn't the first guy to do it. But he was the guy. Like if you ever learned like Cliffs of Dover or anything like that.
Eric Johnson. Okay.
Yeah. Um, I haven't. If I had known we were going to talk about it, I would have worked it up because I've learned it once or twice. But that whole thing is just a smooth movement. It's like da 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 da. It's just like just your hand is just flowing with each movement, and you're playing all these different notes. It's really cool. Um, so yeah, he definitely wasn't the first guy to do it, but he really did kind of turn it into a thing where he kind of looked at it and looked at the science of it sort of and was like, cool, I can do this all the time, you know?
And even for like metal dudes, a lot of their, heroes, that's what they were doing to get their crazy solos. That's what differentiated you know, the sorry about it. I'm having a little brain fart. The Randy Rhodes from like the Warren D. Martinis to the you guys know what I'm saying, just like giving each player their individual voicing. And then when you add whatever your tone palette is, whatever gear you're using, uh, you know, this is what makes guitar players them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
well, why don't you tell these guys, this is a lot of great stuff, and I'm sure if anyone got a lesson from you that you could talk about this in more detail, maybe you could tabulate all this and you want to talk about what you offer and like how to get a hold of you?
Yeah, man, I do. So I offer private lessons, and you can check them out at here. Let me show the website real quick. And you can go to my website. It's just mattlawrencemusic.com, and I have this little opening page, and I do the first lesson for $35 for an hour. Honestly, I tend to go over if I have time. Because one of the things that I learned when I was taking lessons from Regi was we would just go. And if you have an idea and you feel like the student is finally gets it like right at the 1 hour mark or like right before, I just like to keep going. Um, I really want to make sure that the value is there. Yeah,
A lot of bang for your buck with Matt, guys.
yeah. So I appreciate that. So yeah, the first lesson is $35. And then after that, it's usually 50 for an hour. But again, usually it's longer than an hour. Especially if you start to get, you start getting the feel of it. And that's like pretty standard price. And then so you can go to the lesson store and buy the lessons, or you could just email me too, and we could just do a PayPal or anything like that. Either PayPal or Venmo or anything like that works too. Yeah, and that's the lessons has been really helpful for me, especially since the gigs have kind of gotten slow this past year. And I enjoy teaching. I like making the light bulbs go off for the students. I think it's fun. And I took a lesson the other day. I look at it as like if I could teach somebody, then that means that I could take a lesson from somebody else. You know,
Guitar is
yeah,
such a
so vast.
complicated instrument.
It's so vast, and then like you could be even talking. It's so deep. There's so many levels to it because it's like we could go really deep into guitar, and that has nothing to do with music. Like playing the right thing has nothing to do with like how good you can shred and go, you know. Um, so it's like, yeah, and that has nothing to do with accompanying the singer, and that has nothing to do with like, you know, the mindset of like improvising and stuff like that. I've known plenty of guys, not as much guitar players because guitar players don't really read, but piano players. When I was in school, we did there was this one girl that was really, really amazing at piano, and she could just shred and shred.
Yeah,
But she had to have sheet music in front of her. Like she could sight read Bohemian Rhapsody, but like the idea um, of improvising was like this crazy, weird thing.
weird.
So there's so many different sides of it, and then you talk about, charts, coming up with music charts, and coming up with talking about language to communicate with other musicians and stuff. It's so vast.
So
And songwriting, and man.
I've got like a devil's advocate question for you, Matt.
Mhm.
If someone's not interested in like kind of like the roots music, like the soul, the pop, R&B, or even rock, if they're more interested in some of like the more newer genres, like I don't know, if they want to do dream pop, if they want to do metal, if they want to do something a little bit more outside of mainstream guitar, could you help them with that?
Yeah, because I think a lot of it is really, it all stems from the same place. All of that stems from um, the same information it stems from the same knowledge and the same theory of music, and I do a lot of music theory lessons as well. But even just, knowing where all your chord voicings are, um, and you do that with delay, and now you're the edge. You know,
Yeah.
um, it all stems from the same information.
So you
Uh,
can give them, you can guide them towards like even production techniques that they can utilize to get the sound that they're looking for.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that's really the thing, and I think that's kind of the journey of just doing your homework and just seeing where all these guys get it from. It's like, where did even the punk guys, all the guys that were playing at CBGB's in New York, like where did they learn from? Like what did they look at? And then who did that guy look at? It's like I always say, since we had mentioned blues already, people look at Clapton and they're like, yeah, he's like a great blues guy, and he is a great blues guy, but I would say he took part in the movement that was responsible for blues rock,
Hmm.
not like BB King blues, because Eric Clapton and BB King blues are different. And so, like, you talk about all the different styles of maybe like the pop thing now, or anything like that, or punk or folk or anything, just looking, researching and figuring out, if I want to sound like this guy, who did this guy listen to? And then you'll find that, like, I don't know, Stevie Ray Vaughan, if you want to play like him, you gotta, if you want to understand his stuff, you gotta go look at Hendrix. Who did Hendrix listen to? And then it just becomes this thing where you end up at like these really old recordings,
Well,
where, and
uh,
uh, and that's kind of the root of all of it.
another thing too is like I had a brother-in-law show me just some like radio pop song, and I was looking at it. I think it was like a Justin Bieber song, and he looked up the tabs for it, and it was like these weird like ninth chords to like a dominant chord, and it it really brought to mind that if what you're trying to do is create like atmosphere and texture, guitar, you can use these complicated chords and put it in a structure that is like dead simple, and somehow you're borrowing from like this more esoteric musician or genre, and it's still happening in all genres across the board, whether you're using a guitar, a synthesizer, or whatever. If you want to learn some music theory uh, to get you there, I think Matt's got you covered basically.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hey man, we'll probably be jumping off pretty soon, but do you want to show them some of your beats and your production things that you do real quick before we go?
Yeah, sure, man. One of the things that I've kind of been doing lately, especially this past year, I've been sending out guitar tracks to like producers. And so I've been just kind of doing some beats and stuff and just playing some guitar over them. It's been really nice. Because that's kind of the one thing um, about only being a hired gun. You don't really have stake. Sometimes you just kind of show up to the gig, and then it lets you, you know, you kind of just do your job and then you go home.
Mhm.
And then it's sort of like you spend all this time to build this one moment, which is the gig. You know, let's say you start at 2 o'clock or something, and then you do the gig, and now it's over, and now it's like, okay, cool. I don't have anything actually to show for this. So doing stuff like this, even just, it's not really that big of a deal, but it's just something.
Yeah.
Um, it's nice just to have something to show, for sure. So this is kind of one of the things that I was, you know, been working on. Playing a little bass too. Not crazy awesome at bass or anything, and they're really just loops, but that's what a lot of these guys need sometimes, you know.
Sure.
Just a little melody and you figure it out. I learned how to do all this stuff this past year. So much YouTube time. So much YouTube time. So, but just stacking guitars and stuff like that. So, you can check out my page. It's just m.lawrence. For the beat stuff. So, yeah. So if you're a singer-songwriter or anything like that, or you just want to, we call it top lining, is that if you want to just come up, you want to just come up with a page, or like a song and just come up with a melody, this is a great start for a lot of songwriters.
Could you make custom beats for your students if they need a beat for I don't know, alternative like Smashing Pumpkins style songs? Could you get them on the right track so that they could apply the skills and use some of your rhythms for it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the thing about it's really just about tone. As far as like if you said that if you told me I want to make a Smashing Pumpkins type thing, I would say, okay, the first thing that we need to do is try to get a guitar sound that sounds like the Smashing Pumpkins. And then pretty much anything that you play is sort of going to sound like the Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
everything, but at least you're that much closer. Um, and I think that's what a lot of people mean. And the other thing is tempo. I've been realizing that, if you want a really crazy like party vibe, you're looking at 150 BPM to 110 BPM. So it's like if you want this slow, if you want it to be a little bit slower, you take Smashing Pumpkins guitar and let's say, I don't know, 1979, and you want to get in that wheelhouse, it's a nice thing to start around the same tempo, you know.
That
And
is fucking important for
yeah,
for an audience,
yeah,
for a beginner.
yeah,
I mean, it took me a long time to really grasp that, and I made a lot of progress with dexterity and technique, just like muscle memory. I did not make a lot of progress with like some of the fundamentals with rhythm. I started when I was 11. It took me about 6 or 7 years to realize what you just said, actually.
yeah, yeah. It's so important. It's really important. And that's something I've been working on. I've been realizing how slow my left hand is in comparison to my right hand, and I see these guys that are playing these crazy lines, and I'm like, I'm so close. I'm just gonna keep on going, and so I can nail it.
Well, on top of that, like, fuck, man, the modulation that you use is predicated on tempo.
Mm-hmm.
Even like chorus, flange,
Oh yeah.
delay, even reverbs and rotaries, phasers, they're all predicated on time. I mean, that's why they're called time-based effects.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, as a guitar player, if you're even going to think about using any of that stuff, you got to figure out the tempo. I mean, you don't have to. You can get lucky. You can be happenstance. But if you really want to be deliberate, if you really want to be like a master of it, uh, it's good to know what you're working with rhythmically, because if you don't know what a a quarter note delay is versus an eighth note delay versus a dotted quarter note versus a 16th note delay, and so on and so forth. You'll never really know how to apply any of it, and you'll just be stuck, and it sucks to be stuck, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
I mean, and that's why people take lessons. That's it's like it's just it's just kind of a part of the whole learning process.
mhm.
The hard part is respecting the process. Is
Yeah.
is being patient and just saying, okay, look, I'm still learning, and then that's why it's important to kind of take videos and just do little things just so you can see, and even if it was just I can play 16th notes at 100 BPM on what's today, March 11th. Find that last year you're like, okay, dude, I could do that way faster. You know, it's so incremental. It's like the tires on your car. You kind of you don't realize that they're like wearing down until like it pops, and then you're like, maybe I should have looked. It's so incremental that you don't really notice. And that's how progress is, especially with skills in general. But except, unless you try something one day and you're like, wow, I definitely couldn't have done that 3 months ago. And that's like the best feeling.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, man.
I had some of those aha moments from some of what Matt taught me with respect to, like, I was trying to build my country chops. I always wanted to learn some twangy stuff. And I'm definitely not a master. I'm not advanced with like country voicings, but there's absolutely some stuff that I can do now that I couldn't do before I started with Matt back in September of 2020. And we've only had maybe like 4 or 5 lessons in our time
Yeah.
stretch, but every time it's fun. We always go over the hour. I mean, hey, it's up to Matt though if he wants to do that, you know.
Yeah, right.
I can't say to everybody that he's going to do that, but you
Yeah, I
know,
like to if I have the time.
and shit, I mean, yeah, even my weak points, I mean, Matt's able to point those out, and yeah, that's that. I think that enough said about that.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. I'm glad you've been finding it valuable. You've definitely came a long way for sure in a short
Yeah.
amount. So,
So before we go, anything else you're working on? Like anything on the horizon in the future?
um, really the focus has kind of just been try to be better at working at home. Like being more intentional about my time. And taking my goals and putting them up on display so I could look at every day. Just so like if I start doing something else, it's like, okay, that's what I want to be doing. um, you know Let me just keep working towards that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. I think people get distracted. It's really easy to get distracted from your goals if you're not looking at them every day. And So really, I just want to keep sending out these packs, and hopefully I can get like a placement with an artist or something. I'm sure that's on the horizon at some point. And building up my own page, building up my own clientele in that little space. Um, at least as a supplemental thing for the gigs. But for now, that's been a big part of what I've been doing for sure. Teaching lessons, doing that thing, and once the gigs come back, I still want to be sending out to these producers like all the time, you know, because I don't want to just be that, just a one sided guy. I want to have
Yeah.
multiple sides. I want to be able to do this and this and this and this and this. Because at the end of the day, eventually you're going to get older, and if you're still gigging and I'm sure maybe by the time that I'm 50 I'll have a lot of other opportunities, but that I don't have now.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to be struggling for the same gigs. you
God,
know
yeah.
in 30 years. So that's for sure.
Well, you're in the town where word spreads, and you got some word out there. People know who you are, and I would say, at least try Matt for his intro session for a discount. See if you like it. If you don't, go to the next guy.
Right. And that's the thing too. There's so many different teachers, that with different teaching styles. And I've taken a lot of lessons, and some people I just didn't vibe with. So that's kind of the point of the intro lesson. It's just to make it something really meaningful. And rather than, for me, I see a lot of guys that it's that music is kind of an intellectual pursuit, and that's really cool. But I definitely tend to look at it more of like a sort of more of like a human experience, of just the idea that, like, what we do could affect somebody that's listening, that we have the power to, like, play a little bit, just a few notes, or like play this song that like so and so's grandma used to sing all the time, and they haven't heard it in 30 years, and that, like, makes them really emotional. I love that kind of stuff.
Well, even if you've got a household where, like, you might be going through hard times, if you play something on guitar or piano, a little bit of music can just cheer up your brother, your sister, your mom, whoever's around you. And it's just one of those things that, it's got that magic, it's got that primordial connection with all of us, and pretty freaking sick. I mean, you know,
Yeah, man.
long
That's what
live.
it's all about. That's what it's all about. But listen, man, I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, yeah.
So this has been fun.
We'll have you back on, hopefully, man. But I'm sure a lot of people want to see what you're up to 6 months from now,
Yeah, me too. Yeah, good luck on the podcast, man. I think it's a great idea. So
Thanks.
keep on doing it, and seeing how many lives you can touch with it. That's a great thing,
For sure, dude.
you know. But yeah, man. So I appreciate it.
Likewise, man. We appreciate you.
Thanks, man.
All right. I'll see you soon, man. I'll hit you up in the next week or so, and we'll try to get something together.
Cool. Anytime, man. Let me know.
Okay.
All right.
Have a
Bye.
good week, man.
You too. Bye.
Peace.